It was 2:04 a.m. when my phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand. I flinched awake, disoriented, my heart already racing in that instinctive, primal way it does when something breaks the silence of the night. For a moment I thought it might be an emergency, my mother perhaps, or my sister. But then I realized it wasn't my phone. It was his. The screen lit up the room in an eerie glow, casting shadows on the walls as I turned to see his phone vibrating next to him. He was fast asleep, breathing steadily, completely unaware. I reached over, intending to quiet it so it wouldn't disturb him. That's when I saw it. Katia Redheart. The name stared back at me like a slap in the face, the little red heart making it all the more grotesque. My stomach twisted into knots, and suddenly I was wide awake, adrenaline coursing through me. Who the hell was Katia? Hey, I whispered, shaking his shoulder, my voice trembling. Your phone is ringing. He groaned, barely lifting his head from the pillow. Huh. Your phone, I repeated, holding it up for him to see. The name on the screen was still there, taunting me. His eyes flickered open, then widened slightly when he saw it. In that split second I thought I saw something, panic, maybe, or guilt, flicker across his face before he masked it with a sleepy groan. It's nothing, he muttered, reaching for the phone and hitting the side button to silence it. He didn't answer. He didn't even hesitate before turning his back to me, burying his face in the pillow again. Nothing. My voice was louder now, tinged with disbelief. Who's Katia? And why does she have a heart next to her name? He exhaled sharply, annoyed. It's probably a wrong number or something. Go back to sleep. I stared at him, stunned by his casual dismissal. A wrong number? At 2 in the morning? With a heart emoji. Jesus, Emily, he snapped, sitting up now, his tone sharper than I'd expected. I don't know who it is. It's probably some spam call. Just drop it, okay? But I couldn't just drop it. Not with the way my chest felt like it was caving in. Not with the way his face had tensed up when he saw the name. I lay back down, stiff and silent, my mind spinning. I didn't believe him. I wanted to desperately. I wanted to trust that the man lying next to me, the man I'd built a life with, wasn't hiding something. But the doubt had already taken root, gnawing at me like a relentless parasite. He was asleep again within minutes, his breathing deep and even. But I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, the name repeating in my head like a sinister chant. Katia. Katia Redheart. By morning I was a wreck. He kissed me on the forehead as he left for work, his usual affection seemingly unchanged. See you tonight, he said with a smile, and for a moment, I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I overreacting? Was it really nothing? But I couldn't shake it. I couldn't let it go. Once I was sure he was gone, I picked up his phone. I knew his passcode, it was my birthday after all. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it and scrolled through his recent calls. There it was, at the top of the list, Katia Redheart. He hadn't deleted it. I copied the number into my own phone, my heart pounding. What was I even doing? Did I really want to know the truth? That afternoon, when I had a moment alone, I called the number. I used my work phone so it wouldn't be traced back to me. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Hello, she said, her tone warm and familiar. Millie, you finally decided to call me back. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I could barely form words, the nausea rising in my throat. This isn't him, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. This is his wife. There was silence on the other end. And then softly, the woman spoke again. Oh. Just one word, but it was heavy with meaning. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused. She just knew. Who are you? I demanded, anger now replacing the shock. What is your relationship with my husband? I didn't know he was married, she said finally, her voice faltering. She sounded young. Too young. He said. He told me he wasn't serious with anyone. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. How long? I asked, barely able to get the words out. How long has this been going on? About 6 months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't know. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of betrayal. I hung up before she could say anything else, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Rage, despair, disbelief. I wanted to scream, to cry, to confront him. But most of all, I wanted to understand why. Why had he done this? Wasn't I enough? When he came home that evening, I was waiting for him. My chest was tight, my heart racing as I watched him walk through the door, his smile fading the moment he saw my face. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and unfamiliar even to myself. He froze, his eyes darting to the phone in my hand. He knew. And in that moment, I saw the truth written all over his face. He stood there, just a few feet away, but it felt like there was a chasm between us. His usual confidence, the casual ease with which he carried himself, seemed to falter. For a moment, he looked like a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. I tightened my grip on the phone, trying to keep my voice steady, though the emotions bubbling inside me threatened to explode. "I called her," I said, watching for his reaction. His jaw tightened, his hands stuffed into his pockets like he was bracing himself for a storm. "She called you Millie. Do you want to explain that? Do you want to explain who she is? Or should I keep going and tell you what else she said?" "Emily," he started, his voice low and measured, like he was trying to calm a wild animal. "Can we sit down and talk about this? Please." "No," my voice cracked, but I didn't care. "You don't get to smooth this over. Not after 6 months. 6 months, Matt. She told me everything. How could you do this to me? To us?" He winced, his shoulders slumping as he sat down on the edge of the couch. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, might try to gaslight me into believing I'd misunderstood. But instead, he just buried his face in his hands and sighed heavily. "I screwed up," he said finally, his voice muffled but unmistakably defeated. "I never meant for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. "Oh, that's rich. So what? It was just supposed to be a little fun on the side. A few late-night calls? Flirty texts? And then what, Matt? What was the plan? Or were you hoping I'd never find out?" He looked up at me then, his eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "It wasn't like that. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I was stressed, okay? Work's been a nightmare, and I don't know. She was there, and it felt easy. It was stupid. I'm sorry. Easy." My voice rose with every word. "That's your excuse? You threw away our marriage because it was easy? God, Matt, do you even hear yourself?" "I didn't throw anything away," he shot back, his tone sharper now. "I made a mistake. I'm human, Emily. I screwed up, but that doesn't mean I don't love you." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Love me? You don't get to say that. Not after this. Not after her." He stood then, his movements quick and agitated, pacing the room like he was searching for an escape. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you. I was going to end it. I swear." "Going to?" I snapped. "When? After another 6 months? Another year? God, Matt, do you even understand what you've done? Do you know what it feels like to see her name pop up on your phone? To hear her voice calling you Millie? Like she owns you? Do you have any idea what that's like?" He stopped pacing, his hands gripping the back of the chair, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. But I want to fix this, Emily. I want to make it right." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face now, hot and unstoppable. "You don't get to decide that. You don't get to just hit reset and pretend this didn't happen. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And for what? For some fling." "It wasn't a fling," he said quietly, almost too softly for me to hear. "But I did. And it was like a dagger to my chest." "What did you say?" My voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with the weight of his words. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't place, guilt, regret, maybe even fear. "It wasn't a fling. I cared about her. I didn't mean to, but I did. And I hate myself for it." I felt the ground shift beneath me, the room spinning as his confession sank in. This wasn't just a stupid mistake, a moment of weakness. This was something deeper, something I couldn't compete with. My voice broke as I asked the question I was terrified to hear the answer to. "Do you love her?" His silence was deafening. He didn't look away, but he didn't answer either. And in that silence, I found my answer. I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling as I tried to process what he'd just admitted. "You don't love me," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "Not really. Not anymore." "That's not true," he said quickly, kneeling in front of me, his hands reaching for mine. I do love you, Emily. I do. I got lost. I made a mistake. Please don't give up on us. I pulled my hands away, the weight of his touch too much to bear. You gave up on us, Matt. The moment you let her into your life, you gave up. And now I have to live with that. He stayed there on his knees as I stood and walked to the bedroom. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it as the sobs finally came, racking my body until I felt like I couldn't breathe. This was my life now, broken, shattered into pieces I wasn't sure I could ever put back together. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The following days passed in a blur of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. I couldn't think straight, couldn't eat, couldn't even look at him without feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. He tried to talk to me, God, did he try? But every time he opened his mouth, all I could hear were her words echoing in my mind. Malie, you finally decided to call me back. I replayed every moment of our relationship, trying to pinpoint where it had all gone wrong. Was it the late nights at work he'd blamed on impossible deadlines? The sudden bursts of irritability when I'd asked him about his day? Or had it been something deeper, something I'd missed entirely? I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting so blindly in a man who had so easily betrayed me. He slept on the couch now, though I doubted he got much rest. I certainly didn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined them together, her smile, his hands, their whispers in the dark. It was torture, a never-ending reel of pain that played over and over again in my mind. But as much as I wanted to shut him out completely, I couldn't. There were logistics to deal with, a life we'd built together that couldn't be untangled overnight. The house, the bills, the shared routines. All of it loomed over me like a weight I wasn't strong enough to carry. Emily, he said one evening, his voice tentative as he stood in the doorway to the kitchen. I was chopping vegetables for dinner, not because I was hungry but because the mindless act of slicing and dicing gave me something to focus on. Can we talk? I didn't look up. What is there left to say, Matt? You already said it all. I haven't, he said, stepping closer. I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to tell you the truth. All of it. I froze, the knife hovering above the cutting board. Part of me wanted to scream at him to shut up, to let me live in the ignorance I so desperately craved. But another part, the part that was tired of guessing, of imagining, needed to hear it. I set the knife down and turned to face him, crossing my arms over my chest. Fine, I said. Talk. He hesitated, his hands fidgeting at his sides. It started 6 months ago, like she said. I met her at a conference. She was working for one of our partners. We exchanged numbers, because we were supposed to collaborate on a project. That's all it was at first. Just work. Don't. I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't try to minimize it. You don't get to pretend this was harmless. I'm not, he said quickly. I'm not. I need you to understand how it happened. I wasn't looking for this, Emily. I wasn't unhappy with you. But somewhere along the way, I started leaning on her. She made me feel needed. Needed, I repeated, my voice rising. I've been here for you every step of the way, Matt. Through every promotion, every crisis, every late night. Don't you dare say I didn't make you feel needed. I'm not saying that, he said, his voice pleading now. I'm saying I messed up. I got caught up in something I didn't know how to stop. And I hate myself for it. I hate that I hurt you. I stared at him, my chest heaving with the effort of holding back tears. Did you love her? He looked down, his silence cutting deeper than any words could have. God, Matt. I whispered, my voice breaking. How could you? I don't know, he said, his voice barely audible. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I could keep it separate, that it didn't mean anything. But it did. And I was too much of a coward to admit it. I turned away, unable to look at him anymore. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white as I fought to keep myself together. Do you still see her? I asked after a long pause. No, he said quickly. I ended it the moment you found out. I blocked her number. I told her it was over. Why now? I asked bitterly. Why not before I had to hear it from her? Because I was an idiot, he admitted. I thought I could have both. I thought I could keep everything in its place, and no one would get hurt. But I was wrong, Emily. I was so wrong. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything they implied. I wanted to believe him, to hold on to some shred of the man I thought I knew. But the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally, my voice trembling. I don't know if I even want to try. His face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw the man I fell in love with, the one who had held my hand through every storm, who had promised to love me forever. But that man was a memory now, a ghost of what we used to be. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I'll go to therapy, I'll quit my job, I'll do anything, Emily. Just don't give up on us. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned back to the cutting board and picked up the knife, my hands trembling as I resumed chopping. He stood there for a while, waiting for something I couldn't give him. And then he left, his footsteps heavy as he walked away. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that the hardest part wasn't deciding whether to stay or leave. It was accepting that no matter what choice I made, the life we had was gone forever. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the front door closing softly. For a brief, disoriented moment, I thought he'd left for work, slipping out early the way he sometimes did. But then I remembered everything. The phone call, her voice, his confession. The weight of it crashed over me like a wave, dragging me back under before I'd even had a chance to draw a breath. I stayed in bed for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, the sunlight creeping through the blinds in thin, unforgiving slants. The house was too quiet, every creak and groan a reminder of how empty it felt now. Eventually, I forced myself up, stumbling into the kitchen for coffee, though the thought of eating anything made my stomach churn. The coffee was bitter, but I drank it anyway, my hands wrapped tightly around the mug like it was the only thing grounding me. I glanced at his spot at the table, the chair pushed in neatly, the way it always was. He'd left his keys on the counter, and for a moment, I wondered if he'd come back at all. But he did. It was late afternoon when I heard his car pull into the driveway, the low hum of the engine cutting off as he parked. My chest tightened as I watched him through the window, his shoulders hunched, his face drawn. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. And maybe he was. He stepped inside, hesitating in the doorway when he saw me standing in the kitchen. "Hey," he said softly, like he was afraid his voice might shatter me. I didn't respond, just stared at him, waiting. Waiting for what? I wasn't sure. An apology? Another excuse? A miracle? "I went to see someone," he said, stepping further into the room. "A counselor. I made an appointment this morning." The word surprised me, though I didn't let it show. "And what, you think one appointment is going to fix this?" "No," he admitted, his eyes meeting mine with a painful honesty. "But it's a start. I meant what I said, Emily. I'll do whatever it takes." I set the mug down with a sharp clink, crossing my arms as I leaned back against the counter. "And what exactly does that look like, Matt? What does whatever it takes mean to you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a lot of empty promises." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, the frustration clear in his expression. "It means I'll put in the work. I'll do therapy. I'll answer any questions you have. I'll be completely transparent. No more lies, no more secrets. I'll prove to you that I can be the man you deserve." His words should have moved me. They should have made me feel something. Hope, maybe, or relief. But all I felt was exhaustion. "You already had that chance," I said quietly. "You had years to be that man. And instead you chose her." "I didn't choose her," he said quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I chose wrong. I chose to escape instead of facing what was going on with us. And it was the worst mistake of my life." I shook my head, the tears I'd been holding back threatening to spill over. "You keep calling it a mistake, like it was an accident. Like you just tripped and fell into bed with her. But it wasn't, Matt. It was a choice. Every text, every call, every time you looked at her instead of me. That was a choice. And now I have to live with the consequences." He didn't argue. He just stood there, his face crumpling with a pain that mirrored my own. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I need you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right, if you'll let me." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to reach out and let him pull me into his arms, to pretend that none of this had happened. But I couldn't. The cracks in our foundation were too deep, the trust too shattered. I don't know if I can, I said finally, my voice trembling. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you and not see her. The silence that followed was unbearable, stretching between us like an unbridgeable gulf. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. I'll wait, he said. As long as it takes. I'll wait. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there alone. The days turned into weeks, each one dragging by with an aching slowness. He kept his promise, going to therapy twice a week, leaving his phone unlocked and out in the open, answering every question I threw at him, no matter how painful. He didn't push, didn't try to rush me into forgiveness. But he also didn't leave. And that was the hardest part. Because every time I saw him sitting on the couch, or making dinner, or folding laundry like nothing had changed, I felt the weight of what I'd lost pressing down on me. It wasn't just him I'd lost. It was the version of myself who had loved him so completely, so fearlessly. The woman who had believed him forever. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized that the question wasn't whether I could forgive him. It was whether I could live with the part of myself that couldn't. The realization sat heavy in my chest, like a stone pressing against my ribs. Forgiveness wasn't a single act, a moment of grace that would wipe the slate clean. It was a process, one that might take months, years, or maybe never truly end. And if I couldn't move past what he'd done, then staying would mean living in the shadow of that betrayal every day, slowly suffocating under the weight of resentment. I didn't know if I had the strength for that. I didn't know if I wanted to try. The next morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing in particular. He looked worn, older somehow, as though the guilt had aged him overnight. When he saw me, he straightened, a flicker of hope in his eyes that made my chest ache. "Morning," he said softly, his voice careful, like he was afraid to startle me. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from him, the silence stretching between us. He waited, his hands wrapped tightly around his mug, his knuckles white. "I need time," I said finally, breaking the quiet. "I need space to figure out what I want, what I can handle." He nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. "I understand. Do you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Because I don't think you do. This isn't just about you fixing things, Matt. It's about me deciding whether I even want to stay, whether I can." His face fell, but he didn't argue. "What do you need from me?" he asked after a long pause. "Just tell me, and I'll do it." "I need you to leave," I said, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess myself. "Just for a while. I need to be alone, to think, to breathe." His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, I thought he might refuse. But then he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Okay," he said quietly. "If that's what you need, I'll go." I didn't expect him to agree so easily, and his willingness to comply only added to the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Relief, guilt, anger. They all collided, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. "When?" he asked after a moment, his voice hesitant. "Today," I said, surprising even myself with my resolve. "I need it to be today." He nodded again, his hands shaking slightly as he set his mug down. "I'll pack a bag," he said, standing slowly. "I'll stay at a hotel, or maybe with a friend. I'll give you the time you need." I watched him leave the room, his footsteps heavy as he climbed the stairs. When I heard the faint sound of drawers opening and closing, I buried my face in my hands, the reality of what I'd just done crashing over me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was truly alone. And the silence was deafening. He was gone by mid-afternoon, leaving behind only the faint scent of his cologne, and an empty space in the closet where his clothes had been. I wandered through the house aimlessly, unsure of what to do with myself now that he wasn't there. Every room held memories, good ones, bad ones, and everything in between. They clung to me like ghosts, haunting me with their presence. I thought I would feel free, like I could finally breathe without him there. But instead, I felt hollow, like a part of me had been ripped away. As much as I hated what he'd done, As much as I resented him for breaking my heart, I couldn't deny that his absence left a void. That night, I sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, staring at the darkened TV screen. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I hesitated before picking it up. His name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," he said softly. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I said, though the lump in my throat betrayed me. "You didn't have to call." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to. I've been sitting here thinking about you, wondering how you're holding up. I know this isn't easy." I closed my eyes, the sound of his voice cutting through me like a knife. "It's not," I admitted. "But it's what I need right now." "I get it," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. I miss you. Even if you hate me right now, I need you to know that I miss you." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away, refusing to let him hear me cry. "I don't hate you, Matt," I said after a long pause. "But I don't know how to feel about you right now. And that's the truth." He didn't respond right away, and for a moment I thought he might have hung up. But then he sighed, a sound filled with regret. "I'll give you the space you need," he said. "Take all the time you want. I'll be here waiting when you're ready." "Okay," I said softly, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. "Good night, Matt." "Good night, Emily," he said, and then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, my heart aching with a pain I couldn't describe. This was the man I had loved, the man I had trusted with everything. And now he was the man who had broken me. The days stretched on, each one blending into the next. I tried to find clarity in the silence, to sort through the mess of emotions that consumed me. But every time I thought I was making progress, a memory would surface. His laughter, his touch, the way he used to look at me, and I would spiral all over again. I didn't know how long it would take to heal, or if I ever truly would. But one thing was certain. The life we had was gone. And now it was up to me to decide what came next. The days turned into weeks, and the weight of the silence became its own kind of companion. At first it was unbearable. A constant reminder of everything that had been lost. I found myself filling the void with anything I could. Cleaning, cooking, even taking long walks through the neighborhood where the winter air bit at my cheeks. Anything to keep my mind from wandering back to him, to her, to the pieces of my life that no longer fit together. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed alone, the empty space beside me felt like a chasm, a stark reminder of the life I was no longer sure I wanted. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by restless thoughts and dreams that left me waking in tears. Sometimes I reached for my phone, scrolling aimlessly through old photos, our smiles frozen in moments that now felt like lies. I would stop at pictures of us on vacations laughing at some inside joke, or the candid shots he'd taken of me when I wasn't paying attention. They were tainted now, every memory clouded by the knowledge of his betrayal. I didn't tell anyone at first. It felt too raw, too shameful to admit that my marriage was unraveling. But one afternoon, as I sat on the couch staring blankly at the wall, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my best friend. "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then before I could talk myself out of it, I typed, "No, not really. Can you come over?" She was at my door within 20 minutes, her concerned expression softening when she saw me. "Oh, she said, pulling me into a hug. That was all it took for the dam to break. I sobbed into her shoulder, the words spilling out in a torrent of pain and anger and confusion. She listened without interrupting, her hand gently rubbing my back as I poured out everything. The phone call, the confession, the endless nights of wondering what I'd done wrong. When I finally stopped, my throat raw and my face streaked with tears, she sat back and looked at me, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. "Emily, this isn't your fault," she said firmly. "You didn't do anything to deserve this." "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I missed the signs. Maybe I wasn't enough for him." "Stop," she said sharply, taking my hands in hers. "Don't you dare blame yourself for his choices. He's the one who broke his vows, not you. And if he didn't have the guts to talk to you about whatever he was feeling, that's on him." Her words hit me like a jolt of electricity, cutting through the fog of self-doubt that had settled over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Anger. Not the fiery, all-consuming rage I'd felt the night I confronted him, but a steady, simmering anger that reminded me I didn't deserve this. Over the next few days, Sarah became my lifeline. She called every morning to check on me, came over with takeout when I couldn't bring myself to cook, and even convinced me to join her for a yoga class, though I spent most of it trying not to cry during the quiet meditations. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again, or at least some version of myself that I could begin to rebuild. Matt texted me every few days, his messages careful and restrained. "I hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need anything. I'm thinking about you." I never responded, though I read every word, my heart twisting with a mix of longing and resentment. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed with another message from him. "Can we talk? I know I've hurt you, but I need to hear your voice." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance I'd worked so hard to create. But another part, the part that still loved him despite everything, wanted answers. I typed, "Fine. Tomorrow at 7. Then I hit send before I could change my mind. The next day I spent hours preparing for the conversation, rehearsing what I wanted to say, what I needed to hear. By the time the clock struck 7, my nerves were frayed, my resolve shaky. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and opened it to find him standing there, a bouquet of white roses in his hands. "Hi," he said, his voice soft, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I stepped aside to let him in, ignoring the flowers as I gestured for him to sit. He placed them on the table, his hands trembling slightly as he sat down on the couch. For a moment we just stared at each other, the silence stretching between us. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I know I've said it 100 times, but I don't know how else to start. I'm so sorry, Emily." I crossed my arms, forcing myself to stay composed. "Sorry for what, Matt? Sorry for lying? For cheating? For breaking our marriage? Be specific." He flinched, but he didn't look away. "For all of it. For being selfish. For taking you for granted. For not realizing what I had until I nearly destroyed it." "Nearly," I repeated, my voice sharp. "You did destroy it, Matt. Do you even understand that? Do you have any idea what it feels like to lose the person you thought you'd spend your life with, only to find out they've been sharing it with someone else?" Tears filled his eyes, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. "You made me question everything, Matt. My worth, our love, my entire life. And for what? A few months with someone who made you feel needed? Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds?" He nodded, his shoulders shaking as he wiped his eyes. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right. Please, Emily. I love you." His words hung in the air, echoing in the space between us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to the life we'd built, the love we'd shared. But the wounds were still fresh, the scars unformed. "I don't know if I can," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again." He nodded, his face crumpling with pain. "I understand. But I'll wait, Emily. However long it takes, I'll wait." For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of hope. Not in him, but in myself. Maybe I didn't have all the answers yet. Maybe I never would. But for now I was still standing. And that was enough. The days following his visit were marked by a strange, uneasy quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but instead bristled with unanswered questions and unresolved emotions. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head. The way he had looked at me, broken and vulnerable. There was a time when that look would have shattered my resolve, when I would have rushed to comfort him, to fix whatever had gone wrong. But now it felt like all my instincts were at war with one another, each pulling me in a different direction. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into work and the small routines of daily life. I cleaned the house, rearranged the furniture in the living room, and even took up baking, something I'd never had the patience for before. But no matter how many loaves of banana bread or trays of cookies I churned out, the hollow feeling inside me remained. Matt kept his distance, true to his word. He didn't text again after that night, didn't show up unannounced or try to force a conversation. I knew he was giving me space, and I appreciated it, but his absence only seemed to amplify the ache in my chest. As much as I hated to admit it, I missed him. I missed the sound of his laugh, the way he used to hum under his breath when he thought no one was listening. I missed the life we had before it all fell apart, even though I knew it could never be the same. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table staring out the window, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah checking in like she always did. "Want to grab dinner tonight?" My treat. I hesitated for a moment, then typed back, "Sure." I could use the distraction. We met at a little Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in glass jars. Sarah was already seated when I arrived, a glass of red wine in front of her. She smiled warmly as I slid into the booth across from her. "You look better," she said, studying me with her sharp, discerning gaze. "Still sad, but less haunted." I managed a weak smile. "Thanks, I guess." She poured me a glass of wine and pushed it across the table. "So, how are you holding up? And don't give me the fine answer. I want the truth." I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. "I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm finally starting to move on, like I can see a path forward. But then something will remind me of him. A song, a smell, even just the way the light hits the kitchen in the morning, and it all comes rushing back." "That's normal," Sarah said gently. "Grief isn't linear, Em. It's messy and complicated, and it takes time. You're allowed to feel all of it, the anger, the sadness, even the love. Doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him," I admitted. "Even if I wanted to, I don't think I'm capable of trusting him again. And without trust, what's the point?" "That's something only you can decide," Sarah said. "But whatever you choose, make sure it's for you. Not for him, not for what anyone else thinks you should do. This is your life, Emily. You get to decide how it looks from here on out." We talked for hours, the conversation shifting from my situation to lighter topics, work gossip, funny childhood memories, even a ridiculous story about her neighbor's cat terrorizing the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, I found myself laughing, the sound foreign but welcome. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt lighter, as though a small piece of the weight I'd been carrying had been lifted. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what Sarah had said. It was my life, my decision. But every choice felt like a gamble, a leap into the unknown. If I stayed, there was the possibility of healing, but also the risk of more pain. If I left, I could start fresh, but I'd be leaving behind years of memories and the man I'd once loved more than anything. The following weekend, I decided to take a drive. It was something Matt and I used to do when we needed to clear our heads. Just get in the car and go, no destination in mind. I rolled down the windows, letting the crisp air fill the car as I navigated winding country roads. With no one to talk to, my thoughts became my only company, swirling and shifting like the leaves blown across the pavement. By the time I returned home, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the house. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I didn't have all the answers, far from it, but I realized that I didn't need them all right now. Maybe it was okay to take things one step at a time, to let the future unfold without trying to control every detail. That evening, I pulled out a journal I hadn't used in years and began to write. I wrote about my pain, my fears, my hopes for the future. I wrote letters to Matt that I knew I'd never send, pouring out everything I couldn't bring myself to say aloud. And as the words spilled onto the pages, I felt a small spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It wasn't a dramatic epiphany or a sudden sense of closure. It was quiet, tentative, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. But it was enough to remind me that I was still here, still standing, still capable of moving forward. Even if I didn't know exactly where that path would lead. The days that followed felt different, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. The weight in my chest wasn't gone, but it had shifted, making space for something else. Something quieter, steadier. I kept journaling each night, letting the thoughts spill out without judgment. Some days my words were filled with anger, sharp and cutting like broken glass. Other days they were softer, tinged with longing and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could piece myself back together. Matt didn't contact me again, and I found myself both relieved and disappointed. Part of me appreciated the distance, The chance to finally hear my own thoughts without the shadow of his presence looming over me. But another part, the part that still craved his reassurance, hated the silence. It was strange how someone who had once been my closest confidant could now feel so far away. Like a figure in the background of a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. One afternoon I decided to clean out the closet in the spare bedroom, a task I'd been putting off for months. It was full of random odds and ends, old clothes, mismatched photo albums, the remnants of a life we'd built together. As I sifted through the piles, I came across a box labeled Memories. My chest tightened as I opened it, the contents spilling out like a flood of the past. There were ticket stubs from concerts and movies, postcards from vacations, a pressed flower from the first bouquet he'd ever given me. At the bottom of the box was a photo album, the leather cover worn from years of handling. I hesitated before opening it, knowing that whatever I found inside would either comfort me or rip me apart. The first photo was from our wedding day. There we were, frozen in time, me in my white dress, him in his tux, both of us grinning like we had the whole world ahead of us. I traced my finger over the image, a lump forming in my throat. I remembered the way he'd looked at me that day, like I was the only person in the room. I remembered the vows we'd exchanged, the promises we'd made. And I remembered how much I had believed in us. Flipping through the album was like watching a movie of our life together. There were pictures of us hiking in the mountains, dancing at a friend's wedding, decorating our first Christmas tree. Each image was a snapshot of happiness, a reminder of the love we'd shared before it all fell apart. By the time I closed the album, tears were streaming down my face. I sat there for a long time, holding it in my lap, trying to make sense of the jumble of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, sadness, nostalgia, love, they all collided, leaving me exhausted and confused. I didn't know what to do with the album or the box or the memories they held. Part of me wanted to throw it all away, to rid myself of anything that tied me to him. But another part, the part that still held on to the good moments, couldn't bring herself to let go. In the end, I put the box back in the closet, tucking it away like a secret I wasn't ready to confront. Maybe someday I'd have the strength to face it again. But for now, it was enough to simply acknowledge that it existed, that my past, no matter how painful, was still a part of me. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window, the warmth a stark contrast to the chill that had settled over my heart. I lay there for a moment, letting the light wash over me, and for the first time in weeks I didn't feel the urge to cry. It was a small victory, but it was enough. I got out of bed and made myself breakfast, a real breakfast, not just the coffee and toast I'd been surviving on. As I sat at the kitchen table, I found myself thinking about the future, about what I wanted my life to look like. It wasn't a clear picture, more like fragments of a puzzle I hadn't quite figured out yet. But there was something liberating about the uncertainty, about the possibility of starting over. That afternoon, I went for a walk in the park. The air was crisp and cool, the trees shedding their last golden leaves. I watched a group of children playing on the swings, their laughter echoing through the air, and felt a pang of longing for the innocence of simpler times. But there was also something reassuring about their joy, a reminder that life went on, even in the face of heartbreak. As I walked, I found myself thinking about Matt again. I wondered what he was doing, whether he was sitting in his hotel room or talking to a friend, whether he missed me as much as I missed him. I didn't know what the future held for us, whether we'd find a way back to each other or drift further apart. But for the first time, the thought didn't fill me with dread. Instead, it felt like an open door, a choice waiting to be made. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a blank piece of paper. I started to write, not a journal entry this time, but a letter. To Matt. I didn't know if I'd ever give it to him, but I needed to put my thoughts into words, to find some sense of clarity in the chaos. I wrote about my pain, my anger, my heartbreak. I wrote about the memories we'd shared, the love we'd built, and the trust he'd broken. And I wrote about the small glimmers of hope I'd started to feel, the tentative steps I was taking toward healing. By the time I finished, the page was filled with words, raw and honest and unfiltered. I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, tucking it into the drawer where I kept my journals. Maybe I'd give it to him someday, or maybe it would stay there, a relic of a moment in time. Either way, it felt like a step forward. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself slowly rebuilding. I started taking yoga classes with Sarah, signed up for a painting workshop at the local community center, and even treated myself to a weekend getaway at a quiet cabin in the woods. Each small act felt like a piece of myself returning, a reminder that I was more than just the woman he had hurt. And then one evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a message from Matt. "I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted to let you know that I'm still here. Whenever you're ready to talk." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to say, or even if I wanted to respond. But as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep blue, I realized that whatever happened next, I would be okay. Because for the first time, I believed in myself more than I believed in us. I sat on the porch for a long time staring at Matt's message. It wasn't anything dramatic, no grand declaration or desperate plea. Just a simple acknowledgement that he was still there, waiting. There had been a time when that would have been enough, when his presence alone could have pulled me back. But now I wasn't so sure. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time I stood and went back inside, the message still unanswered. I poured myself a glass of water and wandered through the house, letting my fingers trail over the familiar edges of furniture and framed photos. The walls felt different now, lighter somehow, like they were no longer holding secrets or shadows. They were just walls, and this was just a house, a space that could be anything I wanted it to be. That night, I sat down with the letter I'd written to Matt. I read it again, letting the words wash over me, and then carefully I tore it into small pieces. I didn't need it anymore. The act of writing had been enough, a way to let go of everything I'd been holding on to. I didn't need to send it to him, and I didn't need to keep it for myself. It was part of the past now, and I was ready to leave it there. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the first rays of sunlight filter through the trees. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of Matt's absence or the ache of what we'd lost. Instead, I felt a quiet resolve, a sense of peace that came from knowing I was finally choosing myself. I picked up my phone and opened his message. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I began to type. "Thank you for waiting, but I think it's time we both let go. I'll always care about you, but I need to move forward. I hope you find your own peace too." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message was simple, but it said everything I needed it to. There was no anger, no blame, just the truth of what I felt in that moment. I didn't know how he would respond, but I realized it didn't matter. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. Later that day, I took a walk through the park, breathing in the crisp air and letting the sound of leaves crunching underfoot soothe me. The world felt wide open, full of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to see before. I didn't have a plan for what came next, but I didn't need one. I was learning to trust myself again, to believe that I could build a life worth living on my own terms. As I stood by the lake watching the ripples spread across the water, I felt a sense of quiet joy. Not the overwhelming, all-consuming kind that I used to chase, but something gentler, steadier. It was the kind of happiness that came from within, born out of resilience and self-acceptance. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew I was going to be okay. When I returned home, there was no message from Matt, and I didn't expect one. I set my phone down and looked around the house, the sunlight streaming through the windows, catching on the small dust motes floating in the air. This was my space now, my life. And I was ready to live it. The past would always be a part of me, a chapter in my story that had shaped who I was. But it didn't define me. I was more than my heartbreak, more than the love I had lost. I was strong, whole, and free to create a future that was entirely my own. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to write a new story, not one of regret or pain, but one of hope, growth, and possibility. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And that was enough.